Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. And friends, we are back in the studio with attorney Scott Scheynost. Scott, how are you?
Pretty good, Jim. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing good. Let's talk about workers' comp today. We're going to go into something we haven't talked about in a while. This is reopening your workers' compensation claim. You know, this is an interesting topic because most of the time, like a car wreck, you kind of think, okay, I've done it, I've gotten paid, and it's over, and we walk away.
Not in workers' comp.
Not in workers' comp. So let me ask you this. When you say reopening the claim or the case, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, and in some states don't allow this, but in Kentucky, you can reopen your workers' compensation claim if you meet a couple of criteria. And this is for claims that have been settled or you've gotten a decision from a judge. Kentucky has a right to reopen if your condition gets significantly worse or if there's some economic changes. And you can reopen within 4 years from the date of the settlement or the award. And this is a chance to put extra money in your pocket. And this is a little bit different from getting medical treatment. A lot of people get the two confused, but today I want to talk about reopening and putting more money in your pocket. And at some other time, we'll probably talk about how you keep your medical expenses.
So just to top line it, though, in Kentucky workers' comp, you have an option for lifetime benefits.
Correct.
As long as you follow that 15-year rule.
Correct.
And some other things that the attorney is going to advise the client
Correct.
on.
And that's different from what we're going to talk
exactly.
about today.
That's about treatment. This is really about money.
Correct.
Which is what a lot of people want to know, especially if their situation is worsened.
Exactly.
You know, for a lot of and you said there were two kind of criteria, right? There's if you've gotten a significant worsening of your condition.
Yeah, we're going to make a very complicated issue uncomplicated for a little bit here. So anything I say is probably going to have a few more things that need to be added to it. But first of all, if you have an old workers' compensation claim and you received a settlement or you got an award from a judge, 4 years from the date of the award or the settlement, you can reopen your claim to get additional money if, number one, if you settled, you retained the right to reopen. And then number two, either you have a significant change in your impairment or there's a significant change in your financial situation, usually for the worse. And you have to look at your particular situation. Everybody's a little bit different, but for most people, this is going to be a situation where your medical condition changes significantly. Usually you have an operation because of the work-related injury, or you had a job where you went back to work at the old job and for some reason the plant went under, you got fired, you decided you didn't want to work there, and your money from that job changes. And when the money from the job changes, sometimes you can reopen your claim for that too.
So let me come back to something. You mentioned a 4-year window.
Right.
Now,
that's real important. Yeah.
Do you have to reopen this within 4 years, or do you have to wait 4 years and then try it?
No, you have to reopen within 4 years. So it's a short window.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like I said, get this confused with medical expenses, which you can theoretically have for the rest of your life. But to put more money into your pocket, you only have 4 years to do that. So, and you know, I've had somebody contact me recently who had a claim that was settled in January 2020. I don't know anything about them. I don't have their medical treatment. That's going to be hard to get done. So even though you got 4 years, you got to be ready to do it within 4 years, which means you probably need to talk to an attorney if this applies to you at least several months before the 4 years expire, so they can figure out if you have a change in your condition, get the proof together, the documents. It's just not walk in my office the day before and do it. Some things have to be compiled to be able to do it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, when we were preparing for this episode, you said, you know, there are three really basic situations where this happens, and you gave some great examples.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if I tear my meniscus,
right?
Okay, walk me through that. How would that potentially apply?
In my practice, I've run into these reopening situations, and maybe 3 areas more than others. And there's others, but the main 3 areas I see are where somebody has a knee injury, and they may have a torn meniscus or an ACL, and they have a surgery for that. As a result of that surgery, they're usually going to get a very small impairment rating from the doctor. We'll talk about impairment ratings and how you get that later on. But essentially what happens is the book that the doctors use will say they have to assign a certain impairment, usually about 2%, 1 to 3%, but usually about 2% for this particular injury. So in the workers' compensation world, 2% is not a very big case, especially if the person goes back to work at the old job. It will get them a little bit of money, and it will also preserve the right to get future medical treatment. And if they don't reopen their case, then they may run into a situation later where this torn meniscus might result in a knee replacement surgery. And if that were to occur within this 4-year window of time, the impairment rating could change significantly from 2% to maybe 15, 20, or 30%, depending on how the knee replacement works. And that's the range for knee replacement, 15, 20, or 30%. So you're talking about a big difference in the same case.
So basically the system is saying, okay, you are more highly impaired now as a result of this replacement, so you can't probably perform at the same level. Therefore, you're entitled to more benefits. And now we're talking monetary benefits.
You're talking about money, putting money into somebody's pocket.
Right.
And you're right. This is essentially the way the system works for workers' comp and how they assign impairment ratings. If you had that scenario with a torn meniscus or ACL and you ended up having a knee replacement, then you're going to get a significantly higher impairment rating. Now, a lot of this money that you get depends on other factors, whether or not you can go back to work and how much money you're making. This is really important for somebody that's around my age, 55, 60, 65 years old, missing work and not being able to carry things down, the plant like you used to might have a big impact on your job. You might even lose it. So not only does it have a big impact with your impairment rating and money that could go in your pocket, your ability to work also has a bearing on this. And if you were working before with a 2% impairment rating, it's not worth much. If you can't work now with a 20% impairment rating because of a knee replacement, it could be worth a whole lot,
right?
Depending on how old you are and what else is going on in your life. So I had about 3 or 4 people call me just in the last week or so about reopenings. That's one reason I wanted to talk about it. Again, I see it a lot with knee injuries, especially with folks that might be 50, 55, 60. That's the age where things start to accumulate and arthritis starts to accelerate a little bit more than it does in younger kids. I see it a lot with back injuries where somebody might have an injury on one level.
Yeah, and that's the other area I want to go into. There are three different examples, but I know with back injuries, sometimes that can be significant,
right?
But it can also get a lot worse if you're not careful, right?
And and sometimes when they do a surgery, it either ignites arthritis or scar tissue in the back. And the cure for that might be to go in and scrape it out, or it might be to do another surgery at levels above and below it, a fusion, which can drastically change the impairment rating too. So if you have a back injury and they're talking about doing another surgery, there's a real good chance you've got a shot to reopen your case. It depends on exactly what they're doing, where they're doing it, and how they're doing it. But that's another significant area, especially if you've had a fusion before. A lot of times that causes pressure above and below where the fusion occurred. And that can be work-related too, even though it wasn't a level in your back. I'm getting real technical now. But even though it wasn't a level in your back that wasn't injured, it can cause pressure at levels below and above it, which makes it work-related, because you wouldn't have that problem if it wasn't for the original work-related injury.
Right, and your body tries to naturally compensate, and that stresses these other areas.
Exactly.
And then at that point, those other areas are affected. And
I've had some clients that had 3 or 4 back operations as a result of the original injury for different reasons. So the knee injuries, that seems to be, something that happens. A lot of people my age I know have that a lot. Back injuries, depending on your age. I'm starting to see a lot of shoulder replacements with this kind of situation too, where somebody had an injury and it ignited the arthritis, and now they're going to, they had like a torn labrum or something, and they fixed that, or rotator cuff, and that ignited the arthritis in the shoulder. Now they're going to have a shoulder replacement. And so the impairment rating could be 1%, 2%, maybe 8 or 9%, depending on what they did. Now it goes up to 20, 25%, depending on what's happening. And things with ratings exponentially increase the amount of money you get in workers' comp. So when you go from a 2 or 3% rating to a 20% rating, you're not talking about maybe 10 or 20%. I'm sorry, not 10 times more, but maybe 30 or 40 times more money involved in this. And that can also triple depending on if you lost your job because of this. So the money and the dollar amounts can change drastically from your original injury.
What's interesting is I noticed all 3 of those involve joints. And I think you said a lot of these joint injuries tend to decline over time.
Yeah, and that just makes sense as we get older, and especially if you've had an operation at a joint, it's usually going to accelerate. Well, not usually, but a lot of times it will accelerate the arthritis in the joint. Joints wear out. It's just the way things are. And I've had doctors say they can replace almost any joint in the body. We weren't doing shoulder replacements when I first started practicing in the 80s, or knee replacements.
Right. Not at the clip we're doing them now.
No, and medicine gets better over time, and more things are available to people, which scares the insurance companies because they may have to pay for it down the road. But for folks that have been injured, there's other things that are available for them. And it's really important to remember you've got a window, a 4-year window to reopen to put some more money in your pocket if the situation meets several criteria. And this is a fairly complex area, and you probably need to talk to an attorney to see what's going on. An attorney will have to look at your old file to see what the settlement agreement award was, to make sure we're talking about the same part of the body, that you retain certain rights. You've got to meet this window of 4 years, which is really a short window for a lot of people.
Well, that kind of brings into play stuff we've talked about in previous episodes where maybe the doctor is trying to say, yeah, it's arthritis and it's just getting older and it's just, degenerative, whatever. Right. But actually, no, it could be based on the actual injury you sustained at work. And that's why it's important to get that second opinion or talk to an attorney if things are getting worse and they're just trying to say it's old age. No, not necessarily.
That's a common excuse for the insurance company to get out of it that can usually be defeated in Kentucky. I'm not a doctor, but as we get arthritis, that tends to cause other problems, and that's usually a reason for a joint replacement. So most people have arthritis, but if you're able to work and then you have an injury at work that activates the arthritis, it brings it into disabling reality, it causes you to have a knee replacement sooner than you would have had if it hadn't been for the injury. Even though you had arthritis, those are still areas that are compensable underneath workers' comp, both for medical expenses and monetary expenses. And every state's a little bit different. Some states don't allow that. Some states have stricter criteria. This is a real technical area. But I think what most people need to realize in Kentucky, that is if they have arthritis and their claims being denied because of the arthritis, there's a real good chance you're going to win that case. And what's going on is the adjuster's looking for an excuse to get out of it. And this is essentially a fight that you're going to have to prove and win. Doesn't occur all the time, but you really need to sit down with an attorney and go over that situation if that's arthritis. And this applies to not only to reopenings, but also just normal workers' comp claims. But in almost all of these reopenings, there's some kind of arthritis.
Right.
There was an original injury. People have gotten older. Most people have arthritis to begin with. It's usually not bothering them, but as you get 40, 50, 60 years old, it's going to get worse. That's just the natural progression of aging, and the workers' comp injury accelerated that natural progression of aging. So
that's why it falls under workers' comp.
If it hadn't been for that injury, you may have had this treatment, but it might be 10 or 20 years down the road. So even though you had it, and even though you were going to get this, workers' comp accelerated the need for it. And that acceleration makes it work-related. It makes the employer responsible for it, makes it responsible for your medical treatment and your lost wages.
When we first started the episode, you mentioned something about the settlement agreement. So I'd like to define what that is. Let's kind of go back to basics, what that is, and then let's talk about that specific verbiage about having waived potentially your right for this. So what is the actual settlement agreement? Why is that important?
It's a resolution of your workers' compensation claim, and there's two ways to resolve your claim. One is to enter into a settlement with the defendant, and we call that a Form 110, where the parties get together and we work out a deal. It's a little bit of a dance with the devil. And what happens is, the insurance company wants to get out of it as cheaply as possible, and you want to get as much as you can. And there's certain things that come into play. It's number one, monetary. What kind of money are you going to get? How are you going to get it? Weekly, in a lump sum. You also have a couple other rights in Kentucky. One of these is the right we're talking about right now, is the right to reopen. Insurance companies hate that because they don't want to do a shoulder replacement 20 years ago, and who knows, they might be replacing wrists or things like that I don't even know about right now, 15 or 20 years from now. So the insurance companies hate that. They don't want to have that exposure. They want you to waive it. They'll usually try to negotiate where you waive that right in your settlement, and a lot of people do.
And so what's a common offset of, okay, so if they're going to say, I want you to waive this, what are they going to give you for that typically?
Well, it's usually money, but another alternative is get your money in a lump sum. In Kentucky, they're only required to pay you weekly benefits, which nobody wants. I wouldn't want it. The insurance company knows that too. They deal with folks that want money every day, thousands of them, so they know everybody wants their money in a lump sum, not weekly. So what they'll do a lot of times is carrot and stick. We'll give you the money in a lump sum if you waive your right to reopen or other rights. Now, your right to reopen is different for everybody. It depends on your injury and how you're doing. If you got a broken bone that healed well and it's never going to break again. I've got bones that are broken. The doctor says you're never going to break it there again. if you've got something like that in a workers' comp claim, then your right to reopen probably doesn't have much value. And if they offer you $1, you might want to take it because you're probably never going to be able to reopen it for that particular injury. Now, if you have a knee surgery planned next week and you want to settle your workers' comp claim, your right to reopen might have a value of $50, $100, $200,000 because there's two things in play. Number one, they may want you to waive your right to medical expenses, and that's maybe $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. Number two, depending on your injury and how much money you're making and how much a case is worth, that's worth money too. So sometimes the right to reopen is not worth much. Sometimes it's worth a whole lot. It depends on your particular situation and your likelihood really to have more treatment down the road that would result in a higher impairment rating.
Well, and that's what I like about talking to you so much is that you've done this long enough that you've seen probably daggone near every type of injury that can be sustained in a workers' comp scenario. So you kind of understand, okay, this is possibly going to lead to this outcome down the road. So you need to consider that. And when people think, hey, I'll avoid the attorney's fees, I'll just try to handle it on my own.
Yeah.
They're not thinking through these complexities.
No, I've seen people waive this right where it was significant. You had a torn meniscus and you waive your right to knee replacement, and they just flushed $40,000, $50,000 down the drain. That was money to them, not counting the medical treatment. And everybody's a little bit different,
Sure.
Some of this is just common sense. Like I said, knee injuries result in stuff down the road. Same thing with shoulder, other injuries do too. And a lot of people know when they're injured if they're okay and going to be better. You can just tell in their eyes. Sometimes they know they're not okay and they got to go back to the doctor next month. And most people know better than the doctors and me how they're doing and what's going to happen. And if you are injured and you feel like it's not resolved, and if you feel like you need more medical treatment down the road, and that medical treatment might be significant, you probably don't want to give up your right to reopen, because that can be worth a lot of money to you. But everybody's different. This is something the insurance company is not going to tell you about.
Right.
They're going to say, we're going to give you some money. This is a reason to talk to an attorney because this can be a significant right.
Well, it's kind of interesting. We've spoken about this in previous episodes, and I know I keep using that, but we've done a lot of these episodes. And it's that the insurance company is not your friend.
No. No. But a second ago you were asking about the settlement agreement, and that's usually a document that everybody gets into, signs, and it gets approved by a judge. And then once it's approved by the judge, that's when your clock starts running on the 4 years. The other way to get this going is if you have a decision from a judge. You actually litigated it, had a hearing, judge issues an opinion, and those opinions can be appealed. But when the final appeal is made, you got 4 years from that date to reopen a case. Now, in any reopening, somebody needs to look at either the settlement agreement or the decision to see exactly what was going on, what happened, how much money you got. Is this a case to reopen? Somebody's going to have to look at your medical treatment, which means getting your medical records to see what's happening. Sometimes you have to get a doctor to look at all this stuff and get a report. But all that stuff takes a little while. So, my piece of advice, anybody thinks that they might be wanting to reopen is make sure you do it well before the 4 years and talk to somebody, because there's a significant amount of paperwork and investigation that really has to be done before you get there.
Scott, that begs the question: how often, if I'm your client, you're my workers' compensation attorney, let's
right.
assume that, and we get a settlement, okay, great, case is wrapped up,
right.
How often should I stay in contact with you, or when should I come contact you and let you know things are going on?
Just give me a call anytime you want to, really.
Okay.
But the criteria, the absolute criteria for that is if a doctor is talking about something changing, like your restrictions. He said before you can lift 25 pounds, but now you can only lift 10. If your job changes, if they're talking about doing a surgery. The big red flag to me in all this is when somebody had an injury, now they're going to have a surgery.
Yeah.
That's the big one. Now, if that happens, I would call the attorney before you have the surgery. But when they're talking about doing a surgery for the old workers' comp claim, that's just the huge red flag. That's when I hear that, I almost know it's going to be a case we reopen. There may be some things that prevent it from happening, but when I hear somebody had a surgery for an old workers' comp claim, it usually is the red flag that says this is the case that needs to be reopened. And, there are other criteria. If you settled your case and you were working at a job, and then if you lose your job or your pay decreases below what you earned when you were injured, you switch positions because you can't do the job anymore, and you don't get any overtime. And it's not just your hourly rate, it's your total weekly wage. So If you have a surgery, that's a big red flag. If you have an income loss, that's another red flag. If your physical restrictions change that prevent you from doing certain things, that's another red flag too. And the actual criteria can be very technical, and I think it's best to talk to an attorney, but those three things are the predominant things in most reopenings. There's other situations, but if you got any of those three things going, I'd talk to an attorney as soon as possible. Now, for our old clients, we flush a lot of files out, but we hold on to the files for at least 5 years, after the case is resolved. So if you were an old client of mine, I've got access to the settlement agreement. I've got access to a lot of other things too that we hold on for a while before we get rid of. And that 5 years is designed to hold it on to the file long enough in case it has to be reopened. And a lot of times when you reopen a file, a lot of the old documents have to be used again, but it also makes it easier for the attorney. I've got all the old records, basically. I know what kind of injury you had before. I know who the doctors are. A lot of times when we know the doctors, we know what's going to happen next. Anyhow, they are like attorneys. They almost always do the same thing too. So if you've got a file with me, call me back and we'll look at what's going on, and we can probably tell you in a few minutes what's going to happen and whether or not this is worth reopening. If you don't have a file with me, then you've got to get that stuff to me if you want me to look at it, or whoever you want to look at it. A lot of people don't have a copy of their settlement agreement. You can get that from Kentucky Department of Workers' Claims.
That was my question. Yeah. Does the state retain some of those
The state
documents?
retains it for a long time. I don't know what the criteria. I've got them back to the 90s. I think they stopped doing it after 95 or so. I don't know the actual criteria. But we can get them from the state. You can get them from the state, but you have to do an Open Records Act request. And for this kind of information, you've got to sign some special documents that allow them to release information with your Social Security number and medical records. So there's a couple of hoops you have to jump through, and it takes 2-3 weeks at least to get these records. And if you don't have them, you can get them as the big thing, but you've got to jump through some hoops to get them. Sometimes you can just make a phone call to the Department of Workers' Claims and talk to somebody that's a workers' comp specialist, and they can pull the form up and they can tell you what date it was approved and what part of the body and what the impairment rating was and some of the information over the phone. And that can give you an idea too. But somebody actually needs these documents to reopen your claim too. If you're going to reopen, you've got to include the owed award or settlement too. So you can get it, but again, there's some hoops to jump through, and it gets back to what I said earlier, is it takes a little while to reopen these. If somebody calls you today and asks to reopen a claim that was settled in January, that's going to be a tough sell because it can take 3 or 4 weeks just to get the documents to figure out if it can be reopened. And then, right now we've got the holidays. This is right before Christmas, so everything's going to slow down a little bit. But the bottom line is if, you're going to have another surgery, if you're going to have a significant job change, if you're not going to be able to do things you did before, those are the 3 big ones. There's other things, but those are the 3 big ones that always grab my attention and tells me this is a case we can probably reopen. The other part is the 4 years. So
yeah,
I've had people, forget to call me or not call me or didn't think they could. And again, you've got 4 years to reopen this case, but that can be a short window.
It flies by. The one thing I take from your previous comments, though, in that little segment, was that if my workers' compensation attorney has retired or passed away or whatever, there's a chance I could go find another workers' comp. I mean, I could call Scott Scheynost.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do that even though you didn't handle my original. It's just a matter. It's just a matter of gathering up the information. Yeah. Do the medical records also have to be recovered for this, or is it just the settlement agreement?
It depends on the medical records. Usually we already have, in my file, we usually have the old medical records till we dispose of it. But, you have to see what the original claim was about some way, somehow, and then you got to get the new records. So the medical records are also important.
And again, that takes time.
It can be, yeah. Some ways are easier, some ways are harder. Recently, we had a big provider here that had a data breach that shut down the medical records for about 8 weeks. So
wow,
that's 8 weeks it took us to get documents we didn't count on before.
How does that work with that 4-year window? I mean, is that an extenuating circumstance?
Not at all. That was my next comment. Is I've had several clients that had an operation after they settled a case and they got money for being off work, as they were supposed to. And in Kentucky, for your original claim, when you get money for being off work, that extends the statute of limitations. So I have had some clients that had multiple surgeries that might be off work 2 or 3 years. And until that money stops, which we call temporary total disability benefits, TTD, they've got 2 years from the date when it stops to file a claim. That delays the time they have to file a claim for a regular claim at the very beginning, but it does not apply to workers' compensation reopenings.
Okay, wait a minute. Back up.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting temporary total disability. I'm
For
getting
the original claim.
For the original claim, I'm getting my TTD benefits.
Right.
But the clock is still ticking.
Well, for the original claim, when you get this TTD, temporary total disability benefits, that's your lost wages for being off work. That delays the clock in Kentucky until those benefits stop. So if you got injured on January 1st, 2020, and then you get benefits until December 31st, 2020, you've got 2 years from December 31st, 2020 until December 31st, 2022 to file a claim. Now, that gives you an extension time. If you have a settlement and agreement, and then later on, as part of that agreement, you receive medical treatment and you're off work again, the employer may owe you money, TTD again.
Okay.
So you may get another period of TTD after the settlement for another surgery. But that second period of TTD does not extend the statute for the 4 years. Your 4-year window stops. That does. And I've had clients.
You already had your settlement.
Yeah, I've had some people that thought that extended it, but it doesn't.
That's
some people can be
algebra here, but it's another reason you need to talk to your
It's just 4 years once you have the settlement.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to be careful of. The bottom line is, if you think something's going on, give me a call. Like I said earlier, if you had a surgery or some kind of major medical treatment, that's when you really need to get an attorney involved in it. And then anytime you have a permanent injury, I think you need an attorney involved in it. But it's always the same games that we deal with even after it's been reopening. A lot of times they won't pay your medical expenses, or they send you to a different doctor that you don't really want to go to because that's the company doctor. It's the same game even after it's been reopened. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to get medical treatment because you've already won. In a lot of cases, we're fighting for that. But as far as the other stuff that's being played out in the workers' comp claim with the insurance company, that's still going on. I say this 4 or 5 times a week. If everybody got treated right in a workers' comp claim, I wouldn't have a job. So,
right.
Sometimes it's a little bit easier to get the medical treatment because you've already won that when you're trying to reopen. But you still got all the other games. They'll still send nurses to evaluations with you and tell you this case isn't worth anything and you don't need to go to another doctor. And no, we don't pay medical expenses for mileage and all kinds of other things. All that still goes on. And again, if you've got a situation that requires a surgery, if you've lost your job, give me a call. We can usually figure out in a couple of minutes what's going on. Same situation as the original claim. We do these on contingency fees. I'm not going to charge you unless I get money for you. We may have to pay some expenses and stuff like that we'll talk about later on. But, it doesn't usually cost anything up front to give me a call, and we'll figure out, what the case is worth and what you're going to pay me later on. And this is still subject to the statutes regarding attorney's fees. I can still never make more than 20% or $18,000. So it's the same deal as at the beginning. If you think you got a case, it doesn't cost anything, give me a call. We hand them on contingency fees. If you don't have a case, I'll tell you that, at least you know. If you do have a case, though, maybe we can put some more money in your pocket. I've reopened several of these. I've actually had the insurance company try to deny medical treatment before, which brought the person back into me, and we got the medical treatment, and they went from like a 20% to total because of that going on. Sometimes the insurance company causes these because they don't treat people right. But if you think this might apply to you, like I said before, it's a free call. We're happy to go over this.
And Scott, if I want to pick up the phone, and again, with workers' comp, you can handle, that's statewide, so you can handle people all the way across the Commonwealth here. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Again, probably the best way is call my phone at 502-937-5287. We monitor that, and we'll try to get back with you as soon as possible, even if we're not in the office. Also have a website that's got a contact form on it, Scheynost Law. You just have to be able to spell Scheynost, SCHEYNOST, law, LAW.com. It's got a contact form, and you can send me a chat message, and I'll try to respond to that soon. I've got a direct email at SCHeynost, ScheynostLaw.com. And I'm starting to get better at texting. We're trying to do that, although I'm not the best texter in the world. My thumbs are too big.
Love your emojis, though.
Yeah. So, we're trying to work into that, too, and hopefully we'll have some things with the office that expand that a little bit here sooner, too.
Right.
But I've got clients that are literally all over the state. Some of them, Colorado, Texas, California,
And that's because somehow that company that they were involved with had a Kentucky connection, and that opens it up for it may actually be a Kentucky claim.
Or they came into Kentucky for a trip and then left, and It
could be a traveling sales rep or come in for a convention, get injured here. And
we call it extraterritorial jurisdiction, and that's another subject for another
I think
webcast.
we did a podcast on that. In the show notes, I'll have a link. If we have it, there'll be a link to it.
But just to work back to the reopenings, or I'll be distracted and go on forever on other things. If you have a workers' comp claim and you did retain the right to reopen, and 4 years from the settlement or the award, something else happens significant. You have an operation, you lose your job, the doctor says, I don't want you lifting 20 pounds, you were lifting 50 pounds before, something like that. Give us a call, because there's a good chance we can reopen that. A lot of it depends on what you got before, so we've got to look at all the papers and figure it out. But, if we can help you, we're happy to. If we can't help you, we're happy to tell you that and not charge you anything. Again, it's a free call at 502-937-5287. And you can tell I like to talk, so we'll be happy to talk to you.
Scott, I love these episodes because you always kind of make it so understandable. And that's the law is not, workers' comp is not, but the way you explain it helps everybody. I hope.
Well, this is a really complex. I'm leaving a lot of stuff out. You don't have enough.
But that's why you're the attorney. That's why you're the attorney. You know what has to happen.
But seriously, can be a really complex area with some of this stuff, and I've tried to really just give the bare bones of it. And I think the bottom line is, like I said before, if you think something's going on, give us a call.
Outstanding. Scott, thanks for your time. Always good to see you, and we'll talk to you again here in about 2 weeks. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's SCHEYNOST law.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.